the entire history of Darth Maul. Welcome back to another deep dive into the shadows of the galaxy. Tonight, we trace the life of one of the most iconic figures to ever emerge from darkness itself. A weapon forged in hatred, a survivor who refused to die, a fallen lord who became something more dangerous than any Sith could have imagined. This is the complete history of Darth Maul. Part 1. Born into Darkness. The story begins not in the gleaming halls of the Jedi Temple, nor in the shadowed chambers of Sith Lords plotting in secrecy. It begins on a world where darkness is woven into the very soil, where magic flows as naturally as blood, and where strength determines survival. This is Dathomir, a planet shrouded in perpetual twilight, its forests dense with ancient power, and its inhabitants bound by traditions older than the Republic itself. In the year 54 BBY, during the waning days of the Galactic Republic, a child was born into one of the most feared cultures in the known galaxy, the Nightsisters, witches who commanded the dark side through ancient magics, passed down through generations, ruled Dathomir with absolute authority. Their power was mystical, terrifying, and absolute, but they did not rule alone. On the far side of Dathomir's crimson forests lived the Night Brothers, a clan of Zabrak warriors bred for one purpose, to Gurrats. These red and black-skinned males, with natural horns crowning their heads and geometric patterns marking their faces, lived in a village separate from the Nightsisters' stronghold. They were subservient to the witches, chosen as servants, mates, or warriors, as the Nightsisters saw fit. The Night Brothers had no say in their destinies. They trained from childhood in combat, in endurance, in survival. They learned to suppress weakness and embrace pain. The leader of the Nightsisters was Mother Talzin, a being of immense power, whose mastery of Nightsister magic made her one of the most dangerous Force users in the galaxy, though she would never call it the Force. To her, it was simply magic, the green mist that responded to her will, that could heal or kill, create or destroy. Talzin had borne 3 sons, all Night Brothers, all marked by the distinctive patterns of their people. Their names were Savage Opress, Feral, and the youngest, Maul. Maul's early years were shaped by the harsh realities of Night Brother culture. From the moment he could walk, he was taught that survival meant strength. There was no room for compassion, no tolerance for weakness. The Night Brothers trained constantly, honing their bodies into weapons, learning the ways of combat that had been passed down through countless generations. Young Maul excelled in these trials. His movements were precise, his reflexes sharp, his aggression barely contained. Even among a society that valued strength above all else, Maul stood out. But Mother Talzin saw something more in her youngest son. She sensed a connection to the magic that flowed through Dathomir, a raw potential that burned within him like a star on the verge of collapse. This power made him valuable, dangerous, and ultimately vulnerable to forces beyond Dathomir. For years, Talzin had maintained a relationship with a visitor from beyond their world, a man who came to Dathomir seeking knowledge of the dark side, who traded secrets with the Nightsister matriarch. This man was Darth Sidious, though she knew him by his public identity as Palpatine, a senator from Naboo who would one day become emperor. Sidious was intrigued by Nightsister magic, by the different expressions of dark side power that existed outside traditional Sith teachings. He and Talzin formed an alliance, sharing knowledge, each believing they could use the other for their own ends. Talzin harbored ambitions of her own. She dreamed of becoming Sidious's apprentice, of learning the ways of the Sith and combining them with her own considerable power. But Sidious had no intention of making her his equal. He was searching for something else entirely. He needed an apprentice who could be molded from childhood, shaped into a perfect weapon, someone with raw power but no independent ambition beyond serving his master's will. But Maul's keeper had other plans. For reasons never fully explained, this keeper refused to allow young Maul to participate in the selection. Perhaps he saw the boy's potential as a threat. Perhaps he feared what Maul might become if given the opportunity. Whatever his reasoning, he locked Maul away when the selection began, ensuring the boy could not compete. Maul's response revealed everything about the darkness growing within him. Using the magic he had observed, using the connection to the Force that he barely understood but instinctively commanded, Maul broke through the locked door. His rage fueled him, his desperation gave him strength. He would not be denied this chance. When Maul arrived at the selection arena, the ceremony was already underway. The visitor, Sidious, stood evaluating the assembled Night Brother boys, testing them, measuring their worth. Then Maul appeared, uninvited and unauthorized. His keeper rushed forward to drag him away, to apologize for the interruption. But what happened next changed everything. Maul's anger exploded outward. In front of Sidious, in front of Mother Talzin, in front of all the assembled Night Brothers, young Maul reached out with the Force and seized his keeper's throat. The man gasped, clawing at his neck as he was lifted into the air by an invisible hand. Then Maul's attention shifted to his competitors, two brothers who had been preparing for this their entire lives. With barely a thought, he crushed their windpipes as well. Three beings suspended in the air, slowly strangling as a child barely old enough to understand his own power demonstrated his dominance. Sidious watched this display with barely contained satisfaction. Here was exactly what he had been searching for: raw power, controlled fury, the willingness to kill without hesitation. But more than that, here was a being young enough to shape, to mold, to turn into the perfect instrument of his will. Where Talzin saw her son, Sidious saw a weapon. The Sith Lord declared Maul the winner of the selection. More than that, he claimed Maul as his new apprentice. Mother Talzin's face betrayed nothing, but inside, her ambitions crumbled to ashes. She had dreamed of becoming Sidious's apprentice herself, of claiming the power he could offer. Instead, he was taking her son, stealing him away to be shaped into something she would never fully understand. As Sidious prepared to leave Dathomir with his prize, Talzin made a silent vow. One day she would reclaim her son. One day she would have her revenge on the Sith Lord who had stolen her future. But for now, she watched as Maul was taken from the only home he had ever known, taken from his brothers, taken from everything familiar. Maul looked back only once as they departed. If he felt anything about leaving his homeworld, his mother, his brothers, he gave no sign. Already the training had begun. Already Sidious was teaching him the first lesson every Sith must learn. Attachment is weakness. Family is a chain to be broken. The only thing that mattered was power. The ship lifted from Dathomir's surface, carrying a young Zabrak boy toward a destiny that would reshape the galaxy. Behind them, Mother Talzin stood in the shadows of her village, watching the stars swallow the ship that carried her son. She had lost this battle, but the war between her and Sidious was far from over. In time, their conflict would draw in Jedi and Sith alike, would topple governments and consume entire worlds. But that time was still years away. For now, there was only a child being taken from his home, and a Sith Lord who had found exactly the weapon he needed for the grand plan he had been orchestrating for decades. Maul's journey into darkness had truly begun. Part 2. The Forging. The ship that carried Maul away from Dathomir did not take him to Coruscant, where Darth Sidious maintained his public identity as Senator Palpatine. Instead, they traveled to one of the most inhospitable and remote worlds in the known galaxy, Mustafar. This volcanic planet, with its rivers of lava and atmosphere choked with ash, would become the first of many crucibles in which the boy would be transformed into something far more dangerous than any natural Zabrak warrior. TDD-9 was no ordinary droid. It had been specially programmed with a split personality matrix, allowing it to serve multiple functions in Maul's training. One personality was gentle, almost nurturing, providing the basic care a child required. The other was cold, analytical, and utterly without mercy, conducting Maul's initial combat training and physical conditioning. This duality served a purpose. It taught Maul never to trust appearances, never to assume safety, never to lower his guard. Even the being responsible for keeping him alive could become his tormentor in an instant. The years Maul spent in TDD-9's care were marked by isolation and relentless conditioning. He had no companions his own age, no friends, no one to relate to except the droid and the occasional visits from his new master. Sidious would appear without warning, evaluating Maul's progress, testing his abilities, and slowly beginning to teach him the true nature of the dark side. But there was a secret Sidious kept carefully hidden from his young apprentice. Maul was not technically Sidious's true apprentice in the eyes of Sith tradition. The Rule of Two, established 1,000 years earlier by Darth Bane, decreed that there could be only two Sith at any given time, a master and an apprentice. The master embodied power, while the apprentice craved it. When the apprentice grew strong enough, they would overthrow and kill their master, then take an apprentice of their own. This cycle ensured that the Sith grew stronger with each generation. That weakness was culled, and only the most powerful survived. However, when Sidious took Maul as his apprentice, he was still the apprentice of another, Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Moon Sith Lord whose knowledge of the Force, particularly its power over life and death, was unparalleled. Plagueis knew about Maul's training. He had granted Sidious permission to train the boy, but under specific conditions. Maul was not to be taught the deepest secrets of the Sith. He was not being groomed to eventually overthrow Sidious and continue the Sith lineage. Instead, he was being trained as a Sith assassin, a weapon to be used against the enemies of the Sith, but never a true heir to their legacy. This arrangement suited Sidious perfectly. He had already begun planning his master's demise, already formulating the scenario that would allow him to kill Plagueis and claim the mantle of Dark Lord of the Sith for himself. Maul would serve his purposes in the meantime, a tool to be deployed when the grand plan reached its crucial stages. And if Maul proved too useful to discard or too ambitious to control, well, accidents could always be arranged. Maul knew none of this. He knew only that he had been chosen, that he was being transformed into something extraordinary, and that his master expected absolute obedience and perfection. As the years passed, and he grew from child to adolescent to young adult, his training intensified dramatically. Sidious personally oversaw increasingly complex and dangerous trials. On one occasion, he took Maul to the planet Toste and suspended him in chains over a deep chasm. The chains were rigged to slowly lower Maul toward the abyss below, a deadly drop that would mean certain death if he fell. Maul was forced to use the Force to slow his descent, to manipulate the mechanism holding him, to endure the mental and physical strain of fighting against gravity and time. When he failed, the chains lowered faster. Success meant only a temporary reprieve before the exercise began again. During one of these sessions, Sidious spoke to Maul about the Jedi. He painted them as the ancient enemies of the Sith, weak beings who claimed to serve justice, but who had hunted the Sith to near extinction. He told Maul that if the Jedi had discovered him on Dathomir, they would have taken him just as Sidious had, but they would have crushed his spirit, turned him into an obedient servant of the Republic, stripped away everything that made him strong. Maul's hatred for the Jedi began to take root, nurtured by his master's careful manipulation. The training was not limited to the Force. Maul was also taught lightsaber combat, and he proved to be a prodigy in this arena as well. Sidious introduced him to the seventh form of lightsaber combat, Juyo, also known as the ferocity form. This aggressive, unpredictable style drew heavily on emotions and the dark side of the Force. It required the practitioner to channel their rage, their aggression, their desire to dominate the opponent completely. Juyo was dangerous even to its practitioners because it brought them so close to losing control, to being consumed by the dark side rather than controlling it. But Maul excelled at walking that knife's edge. As Maul's training progressed, Sidious began taking him on actual missions, exercises designed to test his skills in real-world scenarios. On one such mission, Maul traveled to the swamp planet Tuan Kiti to hunt raptors, massive tentacled predators known for their viciousness and cunning. Maul hired big game hunters to flush the creatures out of hiding while he waited, concealed and patient. When the first raptor attacked the hunters, Maul leapt into action, using a spear rather than his lightsaber to kill the beast. But raptors were pack hunters, and a second creature attacked from behind. Maul dispatched it as well, systematically severing its limbs before delivering the killing blow. This hunt stayed with Maul. He found himself envying the raptors in a strange way. They were vicious, ruthless, and completely free. They had no master to answer to, no one commanding their actions. They lived according to their nature, killing to survive, and that was enough. Maul, by contrast, had a master. Despite all his power, despite all his training, he remained a servant to Sidious's will. This realization planted a seed of resentment that would grow over the decades to come. Another significant mission came when Sidious ordered Maul to cripple the Black Sun crime syndicate. Black Sun was one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the galaxy, with connections that reached into legitimate businesses, planetary governments, and even some sectors of the Republic bureaucracy. They were a potential threat to Sidious's plans, and they needed to be reminded who truly controlled the underworld. Maul infiltrated a Black Sun gathering and systematically slaughtered the organization's leadership. The violence was surgical, efficient, and terrifying. Maul left survivors specifically so they could spread word of what had happened, so they could tell others that crossing Darth Sidious's path was a death sentence. The attack on Black Sun accomplished two things. It severely weakened a potential obstacle to Sidious's plans, and it gave Maul valuable experience in operating independently, making tactical decisions, and using fear as a weapon. Perhaps the most significant moment in Maul's training came when Sidious took him to Malachor. This ancient Sith world had been the site of a terrible battle thousands of years earlier, a conflict between the Jedi and the Sith that had ended with the activation of a superweapon. The weapon had misfired, turning everyone caught in its blast into stone statues, frozen in their final moments of terror and rage. The planet remained a monument to the destructive power of the dark side, its Sith temple still standing amid the petrified remains of armies. Sidious brought Maul to this place deliberately. He wanted his apprentice to understand the scale of the conflict between light and dark, to see what the ancient Sith had been capable of, to breathe the very ashes of Sith warriors long dead and feel their power resonate through the Force. Maul walked through the ruins, his boots crunching on millennia-old debris, his mind touching the echoes of death that saturated the air. He had a vision there, a glimpse of possibilities, both terrible and magnificent. The experience marked him deeply, connecting him to the Sith legacy in a way that mere words never could. Around this same time, Maul constructed his most iconic weapon, his double-bladed lightsaber. The design was rare, almost unheard of in contemporary combat. Double-bladed lightsabers had fallen out of favor because they required exceptional skill to wield without injuring oneself. They were harder to conceal, more difficult to maintain, and offered specific advantages that most duelists found unnecessary when facing enemies who typically wielded single blades. But Maul saw the potential immediately. A double-bladed saber could defend and attack simultaneously, could create unpredictable patterns that confounded traditional defensive techniques, could project an aura of menace and skill that would undermine an opponent's confidence before the first strike was even thrown. Maul trained obsessively with his new weapon, developing his own unique style that combined the aggressive elements of Juyo with the practical advantages of his double-bladed design. The construction of this weapon marked a turning point. Maul was no longer merely a student absorbing lessons. He was a warrior in his own right, a predator honed to perfection. Sidious looked upon his creation with satisfaction. Soon, very soon, the grand plan would move forward. Soon the Sith would step from the shadows and reveal themselves to the Jedi for the first time in 1,000 years. And when that moment came, Darth Maul would be the blade that struck first. Part 3. The Phantom Menace. For Darth Maul, it was the moment his entire life had been building toward. Sidious, operating under his public persona as Senator Palpatine of Naboo, had orchestrated a complex political crisis. He had manipulated the Trade Federation, a powerful commercial organization with a private army of battle droids, into blockading his own home planet. This blockade was designed to generate sympathy for Palpatine while simultaneously discrediting the current Supreme Chancellor, Fienus Valorum, as weak and ineffective. If all went according to plan, the crisis would propel Palpatine into the Chancellor's office, giving him executive control of the entire Republic. But political maneuvering required enforcement. It required ensuring that certain outcomes occurred exactly as planned, that potential complications were eliminated before they could disrupt the carefully orchestrated sequence of events. For these tasks, Sidious deployed his apprentice. After years of training in secret, after a lifetime of preparation, Maul was finally being unleashed upon the galaxy. The Sith would reveal their continued existence, and Maul would be the embodiment of their return. His first assignment was straightforward. Ensure that Queen Padme Amidala of Naboo fell completely into Palpatine's web. The Trade Federation had invaded her planet, forcing her to flee and seek help from the Republic Senate. 2 Jedi had been sent as her protectors, Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maul's task was to track the Queen's ship, to be ready to capture or kill her if necessary, and to eliminate the Jedi if they proved problematic. Maul relished the assignment. His entire life had been defined by hatred of the Jedi, by the knowledge that they were the ultimate enemy, the ultimate test of everything he had become. Now, he would finally face them in combat, would finally prove himself worthy of the title his master had bestowed upon him. Using his ship, the Scimitar, Maul tracked the Queen's vessel to the desert planet, Tatooine. The ship had sustained damage, breaking through the Trade Federation blockade, and needed repairs. They had made an emergency landing in a remote spaceport called Mos Espa, gambling that the Federation's reach did not extend this far into the Outer Rim. Maul deployed probe droids to confirm their location and then prepared for his first encounter with a Jedi. He approached on his speeder bike, a modified bloodfin that could achieve incredible speeds. The desert air was hot, the twin suns blazing overhead, and the Force sang with anticipation. Every moment of training, every trial, every lesson had led to this. He found them in the desert, approaching their ship. The older Jedi was leading a small party that included a young boy Maul would later learn was named Anakin Skywalker. Maul didn't care about the boy. His attention was entirely focused on Qui-Gon Jinn, on the Jedi Master, whose presence in the Force felt like a calm pool of water, deceptively peaceful. Maul ignited his lightsaber, both blades springing to life with that distinctive snap hiss, crimson energy humming with barely contained power. Qui-Gon immediately recognized the danger, shouting for the boy to run. The Jedi's own lightsaber ignited, green light meeting red as the 2 warriors crashed together. The duel on Tatooine was brief but intense. Maul's combat style, aggressive and unpredictable, immediately put Qui-Gon on the defensive. The Jedi Master practiced a taru, a form that relied on acrobatic movements and explosive attacks. But the open desert and his need to protect the others limited his options. Maul pressed the advantage, his double-bladed weapon creating a cyclone of death that forced Qui-Gon to retreat step by step. But Qui-Gon was experienced, a veteran of countless missions. He managed to disengage, creating enough space to leap back toward the ship. Maul pursued, but the Queen's vessel was already lifting off, repulsor engines roaring as it climbed toward space. Maul could have continued his assault, could have tried to board the ship or damage its engines, but that wasn't part of the plan. His master needed the Queen to reach Coruscant, needed her to plead her case before the Senate, needed the political theater to play out exactly as scripted. So Maul let them go, standing in the desert as the ship vanished into the sky. But the brief encounter had told him everything he needed to know. The Jedi were skilled, yes, but they had grown soft. They had not faced a true dark side practitioner in centuries. Their forms were academic, refined through practice against training droids and tournament matches, rather than real-life or death struggles. Qui-Gon had survived because Maul allowed it, because the plan required it. Maul returned to his ship and continued tracking the Queen's vessel. It proceeded to Coruscant, as expected, where Amidala made her case before the Senate. As Sidious had predicted, the Senate proved unable or unwilling to take decisive action. This failure drove Amidala to return to Naboo, determined to liberate her people herself if the Republic would not help them. And so the pieces moved into their final positions. The Queen would return to Naboo. The Jedi would accompany her. Maul would be waiting. And when the confrontation came, he would reveal the Sith's return in the most dramatic way possible, by killing Jedi Masters in single combat, proving that the dark side had survived and grown strong during its millennium in hiding. Maul arrived on Naboo ahead of the Queen's return. He positioned himself in the palace at Theed, the capital city, and waited. His patience was absolute. He had waited his entire life for this moment. A few more hours meant nothing. When the attack on Theed began, Maul made his presence known. The battle was three-pronged. Naboo security forces and Gungan warriors fought the Trade Federation's droid army on the planet's surface. Pilots attempted to destroy the droid control ship in orbit, and a small team, including the Queen, infiltrated the palace to capture the Trade Federation's leaders. It was this last group that encountered Maul. He emerged from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh, his crimson and black face marking him as something alien, something dangerous. His double-bladed lightsaber ignited with a flourish, and immediately Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan moved to intercept him, while the Queen's team continued toward the throne room. What followed was a duel for the ages. The battle ranged through the palace's hangar bay and into the vast generator complex beneath, a series of walkways suspended over massive plasma processing chambers. The three combatants moved with supernatural speed and precision, lightsabers clashing in a symphony of crackling energy. Maul was in his element. Against two Jedi simultaneously, he not only held his ground, but dominated. His double-bladed weapon became a blur of motion, simultaneously defending against attacks from multiple angles while launching his own strikes. He used the narrow walkways to his advantage, forcing the Jedi to approach in single file, limiting their ability to flank him. He targeted Obi-Wan specifically, recognizing the Padawan as the weaker of the two opponents. The strategy worked. A well-timed kick sent Obi-Wan tumbling off the walkway to a lower level, temporarily removing him from the fight. Now it was one-on-one, Maul versus Qui-Gon, and the odds had shifted decisively in the Sith's favor. They fought through a series of corridors protected by periodic laser gates, defensive barriers that cycled on and off. Maul deliberately led Qui-Gon into these corridors, recognizing another opportunity to separate the Jedi and eliminate them individually. When a gate descended between them, trapping Qui-Gon on one side and Maul on the other, while Obi-Wan was stuck even further back, Maul allowed himself a moment of meditation. He paced like a caged predator, focusing his energy, preparing for the final exchange. Qui-Gon, by contrast, knelt in meditation. The Jedi Master centered himself, trying to recover his energy. The duel had been exhausting, and Qui-Gon's form, Ataru, burned through stamina quickly. But he was also contemplating something deeper. His master, Count Dooku, had once been fascinated by the Sith. Perhaps Qui-Gon was thinking about those conversations, wondering if he had underestimated the danger his order faced. When the gates lifted, the two warriors came together in a final, desperate exchange. Maul's aggression was overwhelming, his strikes coming in rapid succession, each one forcing Qui-Gon to give ground. The Jedi Master's exhaustion was showing, his defenses slowing fractionally, his movements losing their earlier precision. Then Maul struck with his signature technique. While the Jedi expected a lightsaber blow, Maul instead thrust forward with the hilt of his weapon, the hard metal impacting Qui-Gon's chin with brutal force. The strike stunned the Jedi Master, breaking his concentration for just an instant. But an instant was all Maul needed. Before Qui-Gon could recover, Maul reversed his grip and drove one blade of his lightsaber directly through the Jedi's torso. Qui-Gon's eyes went wide with shock and pain. His lightsaber deactivated and clattered to the floor. Slowly, Maul lowered him to the ground, savoring this moment of triumph. The first Jedi Master to die at the hands of a Sith in nearly 1,000 years. The first confirmation that the Sith had not only survived, but had returned stronger than ever. The fight was vicious. Maul and Obi-Wan exchanged strikes, neither giving ground, both pouring everything they had into killing the other. Maul remained confident. This was just a Padawan, after all, a student not yet worthy of the rank of knight. He had already killed the master. The apprentice would follow soon enough. Maul's confidence led to carelessness. He disarmed Obi-Wan, actually kicking the Padawan's lightsaber into the reactor shaft below. With Obi-Wan unarmed and on the defensive, Maul thought the fight was over. He used the Force to push Obi-Wan toward the edge of the walkway, dangling him over the abyss. One more push and the Jedi would fall to his death, and Maul would have killed both of Qui-Gon's present students in a single encounter. But he underestimated Obi-Wan's resolve. The Padawan called upon the Force, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. In one fluid motion, he leaped up from the shaft, summoning Qui-Gon's fallen lightsaber to his hand. As he rose, Maul had only a fraction of a second to react, but it wasn't enough. Obi-Wan landed behind him, and in a single stroke, cut Maul's double-bladed lightsaber in half. Then he cut Maul in half. The shock on Maul's face was absolute. How had this happened? How had a mere Padawan bested him? The pain came an instant later, as his body separated at the waist, his legs tumbling one direction while his upper body fell the other. He grabbed the edge of the walkway, his fingers clawing desperately for purchase, but he was already falling. The last thing he saw was Obi-Wan's face looking down at him, grief and fury and triumph all mixed together. Then Maul fell into the reactor shaft, his consciousness fragmenting as the dark side screamed through him. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He was Darth Maul, the apprentice of Darth Sidious, trained his entire life for this moment. He couldn't die. He wouldn't die. Above, the droid control ship exploded, deactivating the invasion force and ending the Battle of Naboo. The Trade Federation leaders were captured. Queen Amidala's gambit had succeeded, and Obi-Wan Kenobi knelt beside his master's body, making a promise that would change the course of galactic history. He would train Anakin Skywalker, would honor Qui-Gon's last wish. Far below, in the depths of the reactor complex, Maul's bisected body was swept into a waste disposal system, eventually being jettisoned with other debris from the battle. His remains were carried away from Naboo, tumbling through space until they crashed on a junk world whose name he didn't even know. By all rights, Darth Maul should have been dead. His body had been cut in half. He had fallen hundreds of meters. He had been expelled into space and crashed onto an alien world. Any one of these things should have been fatal. All of them together should have been absolutely certain death. But Maul had one thing that kept him alive, one force more powerful than physics or biology or rational thought. He had his hatred, and hatred, when cultivated and focused with the dark side of the Force, could accomplish impossible things. Even as his body shut down, even as death reached for him, Maul clung to consciousness through sheer force of will. He clung to his hatred of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi who had destroyed him. He clung to his rage at being defeated. He clung to his desire for revenge. These dark emotions became a lifeline, a connection to the force that sustained him when his body should have failed entirely. Maul survived. But survival came at a terrible cost. His mind, strained beyond all limits, shattered. His memories fragmented. His identity dissolved into chaos, and his body, broken and incomplete, required a solution that no sane being would have conceived. Using the Force instinctively, without conscious thought, Maul scavenged parts from the junk around him and constructed a new, lower body. The once proud Sith apprentice, the weapon Darth Sidious had spent decades forging, had been reduced to a mad thing living in filth, his power and training locked away behind walls of trauma and insanity. If anyone had discovered him in those years, they would never have recognized him as Darth Maul. They would have seen only a broken, pathetic creature, more to be pitied than feared. But even in madness, even reduced to such depths, Maul's hatred never died. It burned on, a tiny ember buried in the ashes of his mind, waiting for someone to find it and fan it back into flames. That someone would come, eventually, but first, Maul would spend over a decade lost in darkness, waiting for salvation or death, whichever came first. Part 4. Resurrection. For more than 10 years, Darth Maul existed in a state that defied all understanding of life and death. The junk planet Lotho Minor had become his entire universe, a sprawling wasteland of discarded technology and toxic waste. He had no memory of his name, no recollection of his training, no understanding of what he had once been. There was only the present moment, the constant gnawing hunger, the never-ending search for food among the refuse, and the darkness that consumed his mind. He spoke to himself constantly, rambling fragments of thoughts that almost made sense but never quite connected. Sometimes he would rave about a battle, about falling, about someone with a face he couldn't quite remember. Other times he would whisper about revenge, about enemies whose names had been lost to the chaos in his mind, the spider-like mechanical legs that supported his severed torso had become extensions of himself, responding to his subconscious will even when coherent thought was impossible. Other beings dwelled on Lotho Minor, scavengers and outcasts who survived by picking through the endless trash. They learned to avoid the area where the mad cyborg lived. Those who didn't heed the warnings sometimes disappeared, dragged into the shadows by something that moved with impossible speed despite its broken appearance. Maul existed as a monster in the nightmares of Lotho Minor's unfortunate inhabitants, a story told to frighten children and remind adults that there were things in the galaxy worse than poverty and abandonment. But while Maul had been reduced to this pitiable state, the galaxy had continued turning. The Clone Wars, a massive conflict between the Galactic Republic and a separatist movement, had erupted several years after the Battle of Naboo. This war was secretly orchestrated by Darth Sidious, who had achieved his goal of becoming Supreme Chancellor and was now manipulating both sides toward his ultimate objective: the destruction of the Jedi Order and the transformation of the Republic into an empire. Sidious had taken a new apprentice after Maul's apparent death. Count Dooku, formerly a Jedi Master who had left the Order years before. Dooku, now christened Darth Tyrannus, served as the public face of the separatist movement, commanding the droid armies and coordinating the war effort while secretly following Sidious's instructions. As far as Sidious was concerned, Maul was dead and forgotten, a tool that had served its purpose and been discarded. But on Dathomir, Mother Talzin had never forgotten her stolen son. Though she couldn't sense his exact location, she knew in her heart that Maul still lived. Her connection to him transcended mere physical death. When she finally had the opportunity to send someone to search for him, she chose one of her other sons, Savage Opress. Savage had recently been transformed through Nightsister magic into a massive, immensely powerful warrior at the request of Asajj Ventress, a dark side assassin who had been betrayed by Count Dooku. Ventress wanted Savage as a weapon against Dooku, but Talzin had her own agenda. She subtly influenced Savage, planting the knowledge that he had a brother lost somewhere in the galaxy, a brother who needed to be found and brought home. When Savage finally tracked Maul to his lair deep in the refuse, the sight that greeted him was horrifying. The creature before him barely resembled a sentient being. Its upper body was emaciated with skin stretched tight over visible bones. The face was a nightmare of twisted features, horns broken or worn down, eyes wild and unfocused. The mechanical spider legs clicked and skittered as it moved, an abomination of flesh and metal, and the sounds it made, the constant rambling gibberish, provided no indication that any intelligence remained within. But Savage could sense something beneath the madness, a connection through the Force, a familiarity that confirmed this broken thing had once been his brother. He approached carefully, speaking softly, trying to reach whatever fragment of consciousness might still exist in Maul's shattered mind. "Brother," Savage said, "I'm here. I will take you home." The effect was immediate. At the sound of that word, brother, something stirred in Maul's consciousness. A connection sparked, a memory surfaced briefly before being swallowed by madness again. Maul attacked, not recognizing Savage, seeing only another threat in his paranoid delusions. The two Zabrak warriors clashed, Savage defending himself without seriously harming his brother, Maul fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. Eventually, Savage managed to restrain Maul, and they departed Lotho Minor aboard Savage's ship. The journey back to Dathomir took days, and throughout that time, Maul oscillated between violent episodes and catatonic silence. Nothing Savage did or said seemed to reach him. The brother he had come to find was trapped inside a prison of madness, and Savage had no idea how to free him. When they finally reached Dathomir, Mother Talzin was waiting. She looked upon her youngest son with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She had sensed his survival years ago, but had been unable to act until now. The sight of what had become of him, the beautiful, powerful child she had borne reduced to this broken remnant, hardened her resolve. Sidious had done this. The Sith Lord who had stolen her son, who had used him and discarded him, would pay for this crime. But first, she would restore Maul. Talzin led them to the Nightsisters' fortress, to a chamber where the magic flowed strongest. She began the ritual, calling upon powers that made the Force itself seem to shudder. Green mist, the physical manifestation of Nightsisters' sorcery, swirled around Maul's broken body. Savage watched as his brother screamed, whether in pain or rage or relief, it was impossible to tell. The spider legs, that crude apparatus that had kept Maul mobile, were torn away. The magic probed the damaged tissue, stimulating regeneration, repairing what could be healed. Then Talzin called upon other powers, drawing from the dark side energies that permeated Dathomir, channeling them through herself and into her son. She couldn't restore his legs. Those were gone beyond recall, but she could provide replacements. New cybernetic legs materialized, formed from a combination of Nightsister magic and scavenged technology. Unlike the spider legs, these were humanoid in shape, more advanced, capable of matching or even exceeding organic limbs in strength and agility. They fused with Maul's body, becoming part of him in a way the crude apparatus had never been. But the most important transformation was happening in Maul's mind. The madness that had consumed him for over a decade was being pushed back, layer by layer. Memories surfaced, training on Mustafar, missions for his master, the duel on Naboo. His identity reassembled itself, fragments clicking into place like a puzzle being solved at supernatural speed. And with memory came clarity. With clarity came understanding. With understanding came rage. Maul's eyes snapped open, truly open, seeing clearly for the first time since his defeat. He recognized his mother standing before him. He recognized Savage, the brother he barely remembered, and he recognized what had been done to him, understood the full extent of his humiliation and defeat. Kenobi, he whispered, the name carrying all the hatred he had clung to through years of madness. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Over the following weeks, Maul recovered his strength under Talzin's care. He relearned his combat forms, adjusted to his new cybernetic legs, and reclaimed the fighting prowess that had once made him one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. But he also learned about everything he had missed during his years of madness. He learned about the Clone Wars, about how his former master had orchestrated a galaxy-wide conflict. He learned that Sidious had replaced him with Count Dooku, had found another apprentice, and moved forward with a grand plan without a second thought for the weapon he had discarded. The knowledge filled Maul with a cold fury that went beyond mere anger. He had been abandoned, betrayed, treated as expendable. But even more than his rage at Sidious, even more than his hatred for being replaced, Maul's every thought returned to Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Jedi had defeated him, had cut him in half, had been the direct cause of everything that followed, every moment of pain, every year of madness, every humiliation could be traced back to that duel in the Theed Generator Complex. Maul would have his revenge on Kenobi, but first he needed power. He needed resources. He needed to become more than just a survivor. He needed to become someone who could make the entire galaxy tremble at the mention of his name. Mother Talzin recognized her son's determination, and she made him an offer. She had her own grudge against Sidious, her own desire for revenge against the Sith Lord who had stolen her future. She would help Maul gather power, would use her influence to point him toward opportunities. In return, when the time came, Maul would help her strike at Sidious himself. Maul agreed. But he also saw an opportunity that his mother had not explicitly mentioned. Standing before him was Savage Opress, a warrior of tremendous strength, someone who had already proven his loyalty by traveling across the galaxy to rescue a brother he barely knew. Savage was powerful in the Force, aggressive, and most importantly, he was family. In a galaxy where Maul had no allies and countless enemies, family was invaluable. Maul approached his brother with a proposition. He would take Savage as his apprentice, would teach him the ways of the dark side that Mother Talzin could not. Together, they would forge a new path, one that answered to no master, bowed to no authority. They would claim power for themselves, would carve out an empire from the chaos of the Clone Wars, and eventually they would have their revenge on everyone who had wronged them. Savage accepted. How could he not? His brother, restored and powerful, offered him everything he had ever wanted: purpose, strength, and a place in something greater than himself. Thus began a new chapter in Maul's story. He was no longer Darth Maul, apprentice to Darth Sidious. That identity had died on Naboo. He was simply Maul now, a renegade Force user with no allegiance except to his own ambitions. With Savage at his side, he set out to remind the galaxy that some things, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. Some hatreds cannot be quenched, and some enemies should never be left alive, because given time, they will return stronger than before. The Clone Wars were about to get significantly more complicated. Part 5. the Shadow Collective. Maul understood power. He had been trained since childhood to recognize it, to wield it, to respect it as the only currency that truly mattered in the galaxy. But he also understood that raw strength alone was not enough. A single warrior, no matter how skilled, could be overwhelmed by superior numbers. A Force user, no matter how powerful, could be cornered and killed. To truly thrive, to build something lasting, one needed organization, resources, and a network of allies who could be manipulated, controlled, or coerced into service. With Savage Opress as his enforcer and Mother Talzin as his hidden benefactor, Maul began laying the groundwork for something the galaxy had not seen in millennia. A criminal empire controlled by a dark side user, an organization that would operate independently of both the Republic and the Separatists, serving only Maul's ambitions. But attracting attention and commanding respect were only the first steps. Maul's true goal was to unite the disparate criminal syndicates under his control. The galaxy's underworld was fragmented, with dozens of organizations competing for territory and influence. This competition made them inefficient, vulnerable. If Maul could forge them into a unified force, he would command resources and manpower that could rival even the Republic's military in certain sectors. His opportunity came through an unexpected alliance. On the frozen world of Karlak, Maul and Savage encountered members of Death Watch, a Mandalorian terrorist organization that had been fighting a guerrilla war against Duchess Satine Kryze's pacifist government. Death Watch believed in the old warrior traditions of Mandalore, in conquest and honor through combat. They had been allied with Count Dooku and the Separatists, but had been abandoned when their usefulness ended. The leader of Death Watch was Pre Vizsla, a cunning warrior who wielded the darksaber, an ancient black-bladed lightsaber that had become a symbol of Mandalorian leadership. When Vizsla's warriors discovered Maul and Savage drifting in an escape pod after a battle with pirates nearly frozen to death, they brought them aboard their ship. Vizsla considered killing them immediately, but saw potential instead. If these two Force users could be controlled, they might prove useful in Death Watch's ongoing struggle. Maul, recovering from his ordeal, recognized the opportunity for what it was. Death Watch had warriors, ships, and a legitimate grievance against the established government of a strategically important world. They were exactly the kind of organization he needed. But he also recognized that Vizsla was not stupid. The Mandalorian leader would never willingly submit to outside control. Any alliance would need to appear mutually beneficial until Maul was ready to take complete control. So Maul made his pitch. He proposed that they form an alliance to gather the criminal syndicates of the galaxy into a single coalition, with organized crime united under their leadership, and Death Watch providing military strength. They could conquer Mandalore itself. Vizsla would rule the planet, returning Mandalore to its warrior traditions, while Maul would control the underworld networks. Both would benefit. Both would gain power beyond what they could achieve separately. Vizsla agreed, though both parties understood this was a temporary arrangement. Eventually, one would betray the other. It was simply a question of timing and who would strike first. Their first target was the Black Sun Crime Syndicate. Maul had crippled this organization years ago on Sidious's orders, but it had recovered somewhat during the Clone Wars. They remained one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the galaxy, with legitimate business fronts that gave them access to countless worlds. Maul led a delegation to Mustafar, where Black Sun's ruling council had established a fortress. The meeting began with Maul proposing an alliance. The council, seated around a long table in their stronghold, listened with barely concealed contempt. These upstarts thought they could simply walk in and demand Black Sun's allegiance. The leader of the council, Somet Grunsight, began to laugh. His fellow council members joined in, mocking Maul's audacity. Maul's response was immediate and brutal. Savage, standing behind the council, drew his lightsaber and threw it with the force. The crimson blade spun through the air in a perfect arc, beheading every member of the ruling council in a single throw. The laughter died instantly, replaced by the sound of bodies hitting the floor. One survivor remained, Zaitan Moj, a mid-level Black Sun operative who had been standing to the side during the meeting. Maul approached him calmly, stepping over the bodies of his former superiors. "You are the leader of Black Sun now," Maul said. "Do you accept our offer?" Zaitan Moj, staring at the carnage, understood that he was being given a choice between power and death. He wisely chose power. Black Sun joined the Alliance. Their next target was the Pike Syndicate, spice dealers who controlled lucrative drug routes throughout the Outer Rim. The Pikes were more pragmatic than Black Sun. When Maul demonstrated his strength and explained the benefits of joining his coalition, their leadership understood the mathematics of the situation. Resisting would mean war against Anne. But Maul wanted more than criminal syndicates. He wanted the prestige and resources of one of the galaxy's most legendary criminal organizations, the Hutt clan. The Hutts had ruled their corner of the galaxy for thousands of years, their power based on controlling crucial trade routes and maintaining an iron grip on Hutt space. They were not beings to be intimidated easily. Maul led an assault on Jabba, the Hutt's palace on Tatooine. The attack was carefully calculated to demonstrate overwhelming force without actually killing Jabba himself. Death Watch warriors stormed the palace, their armor and weapons making short work of Jabba's guards. When they reached the crime lord's throne room, Jabba sat waiting, his massive bulk apparently unconcerned by the violence erupting around him. Maul made his proposal. Join the Shadow Collective, as he was calling this coalition, and benefit from the collective power of the underworld united. Refuse, and Death Watch would level the palace with Jabba inside it. The Hutt considered for several long moments, his great eyes studying Maul with the wisdom of centuries. Then, rumbling in Huttese, he agreed to the alliance. The Hutts would join not as subordinates, but as equal partners. It was the best deal Maul was going to get, and he accepted it. With these organizations united under his leadership, Maul commanded a force that included smugglers, assassins, drug dealers, slavers, and mercenaries across thousands of worlds. But this was not the culmination of his plan. This was merely the foundation. Everything he had built was for a single purpose: the conquest of Mandalore. Mandalore held strategic importance far beyond its actual military strength. As a neutral world during the Clone Wars, it had influence with hundreds of other neutral systems. Whoever controlled Mandalore could potentially sway those systems to join one side or another. More importantly, for Maul, conquering Mandalore would send a message to the entire galaxy, and most importantly, to Obi-Wan Kenobi. It would announce that Maul had not merely survived, but had thrived, had built something from nothing, and was now a threat that could not be ignored. The plan to take Mandalore was elegant in its simplicity. Maul orchestrated a crisis, deploying forces from the Shadow Collective to attack the capital city of Sundari. These attacks appeared random at first, criminals terrorizing the population, overwhelming the peaceful Mandalorian police. Then Death Watch appeared, driving off the attackers, saving citizens, proving that Duchess Satine's pacifist philosophy had left Mandalore vulnerable while the warrior traditions Death Watch represented could keep them safe. Public opinion swung rapidly in Death Watch's favor. When Vizsla and his warriors arrived at the palace to protect the Duchess, she was in no position to refuse their help. Within days, Death Watch controlled Mandalore in all but name, and Vizsla declared himself Mandalore, the traditional title for Mandalore's ruler. But Maul had never intended to let Vizsla keep that title. The moment Death Watch solidified control, he made his move. In front of the assembled Death Watch warriors and their new government, Maul challenged Vizsla for leadership. According to Mandalorian tradition, such challenges were decided through single combat. Whoever won would command Death Watch and rule Mandalore. Vizsla accepted the challenge. He was a skilled warrior, had trained his entire life in Mandalorian combat techniques, and wielded the darksaber. He was confident he could defeat Maul, eliminate this troublesome ally who had outlived his usefulness, and consolidate his power. The duel that followed was brief and brutal. Vizsla fought with every ounce of skill and determination he possessed, the darksaber clashing against Maul's lightsaber in a flurry of strikes. But Maul had been trained since childhood by one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history. His technique was flawless, his power overwhelming. He toyed with Vizsla for a few exchanges, allowing the Mandalorian to believe he had a chance, then suddenly shifted to the offensive. Within seconds, Maul disarmed Vizsla, literally kicking the darksaber from his hand. Then, while the Death Watch warriors watched in stunned silence, Maul summoned the ancient weapon to his own hand using the Force. He ignited the black blade, let Vizsla see his own death reflected in its darkness, and then beheaded the Mandalorian leader with a single stroke. But the majority of Death Watch remained loyal to tradition, even if that tradition meant following someone they had never wanted as their leader. They painted their armor red and black, adopting Maul's colors, and became known as the Mandalorian Super Commandos. With their support, Maul ruled Mandalore absolutely. To maintain his rule while attending to other matters, Maul installed Prime Minister Almec as his political figurehead. Almec was a politician who had once served under Duchess Satine before being imprisoned for corruption. He understood how to manage the bureaucracy, how to keep the population placated while real power rested elsewhere. He served Maul well, handling the day-to-day administration while Maul focused on larger ambitions. One of those ambitions required settling a score. Maul understood that Obi-Wan Kenobi had been on Mandalore before, had developed feelings for Duchess Satine. This connection made Satine a perfect weapon. Maul ordered her captured and brought before him in the throne room. When Obi-Wan arrived on Mandalore, responding to a distress call from Bo-Katan's resistance, he walked directly into Maul's trap. He found himself captured, locked behind energy bars, forced to watch as Maul tormented Satine. The Duchess tried to remain strong, tried to show Obi-Wan that she understood his duty as a Jedi came before his feelings for her. But Maul wanted Obi-Wan to feel exactly what he had felt, the helplessness of watching something precious being destroyed while being unable to prevent it. Maul activated the Darksaber and drove it through Satine's chest. Obi-Wan's scream of anguish was everything Maul had hoped for. The Jedi had killed him on Naboo, or so he thought. Now, Maul had killed someone Obi-Wan loved. The score wasn't settled, not by far, but it was a beginning. But Maul's moment of triumph was brief. His actions on Mandalore had drawn attention from the one being in the galaxy he truly feared, his former master, Darth Sidious. Sidious arrived on Mandalore without warning, without fanfare, simply appearing in the throne room where Maul sat. He looked upon his former apprentice with something that might have been disappointment or might have been amusement. "I am most impressed that you have survived," Sidious said, "but you have become a rival." What followed was not a duel. It was a lesson. Sidious demonstrated the gulf between Maul's power and his own. First, he fought both Maul and Savage simultaneously, his crimson lightsabers moving too fast to follow. Within seconds, he had killed Savage, running him through with both blades, and Maul could do nothing but watch his brother die. Then Sidious turned his attention to Maul alone. He didn't kill him. Instead, he tortured him with force lightning, the electrical energy coursing through Maul's body in waves of agony. "You're an old friend," Sidious said almost fondly, "and I have uses for you still." Maul was captured, imprisoned in the Spire on Stygian Prime, a separatist prison. There, he was tortured by both Sidious and Count Dooku, who wanted to know the location of Mother Talzin. The witch who had restored Maul had become a threat to Sidious's plans, and he wanted her eliminated. But Maul's story did not end in that prison. His Mandalorian super commandos, loyal despite everything, staged a daring rescue. Rook Kast and Gar Saxon broke into the Spire, fought their way past security, and freed their leader. Maul escaped with his most loyal followers, but his empire was crumbling. The Hutts, seeing his defeat at Sidious's hands, withdrew from the Shadow Collective. Other syndicates followed, scattering rather than face the Sith Lord's wrath. Maul regrouped on Zamber, a former Death Watch base, but General Grievous soon attacked with a droid army. The battle was desperate, with Maul and his remaining forces fighting against overwhelming odds. Through tactical brilliance and the strength of his warriors, Maul managed to destroy the droid army, even briefly dueling Grievous himself before the cyborg general retreated. Sidious did come, and the battle that followed was apocalyptic. Talzin possessed Dooku's body, using the Count's physical form as a vessel for her power. She and Sidious dueled with both lightsabers and force abilities, while Maul fought against Grievous. The entire planet seemed to shake with the unleashed energies. But Talzin had always known this was likely a one-way mission. She had accepted that killing Sidious might cost her own life. When Grievous broke away from his fight with Maul and attacked Talzin directly, driving his lightsabers through her physical form, she had only moments left. With her dying action, she used the Force to throw Maul away from the battle, giving him a chance to escape while she faced her final moments. Maul fled Dathomir with his surviving commandos. His mother was dead. His brother was dead. His empire was destroyed. Everything he had built over the past several years had been dismantled by Sidious's superior power and planning. But he was alive, and as long as he lived, there was still a chance for revenge. The experience had taught Maul an important lesson. He could never defeat Sidious directly. The dark side had consumed his former master so completely that Sidious had become something beyond a mere Sith Lord. He was a force of nature, a manifestation of pure ambition that could not be stopped through conventional means. But perhaps there was another way. Perhaps instead of fighting Sidious directly, Maul could undermine his plans, could work against him from the shadows, could wait for the right moment when the Sith Lord's attention was divided. With this new understanding, Maul returned to Mandalore. The siege of Mandalore was coming, and Maul would use it to send a message to the galaxy. He was still here, still fighting, and he would never stop. Part 6. The Siege of Mandalore. The Clone Wars had reached their climax. For 3 years, the Galactic Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems had torn the galaxy apart, world after world being drawn into the conflict. Billions had died. Entire civilizations had been destroyed, and throughout it all, Darth Sidious had orchestrated both sides, carefully manipulating events toward a specific outcome: the elimination of the Jedi Order and the transformation of the Republic into an empire with himself as its absolute ruler. Maul knew this. Perhaps not every detail of Sidious's plan, but enough to understand the broad strokes. He had been inside the Sith Lord's mind during his apprenticeship, had absorbed his master's philosophy. He had been trained to think like a Sith, even if he no longer held that title. And with this understanding came a terrible realization. The Jedi were doomed. The Republic was doomed. Everything was proceeding exactly as Sidious had foreseen. But there was one piece of the puzzle that intrigued Maul: Anakin Skywalker, the boy whom Qui-Gon Jinn had believed was the chosen one, prophesied to bring balance to the Force. That boy had grown into a powerful Jedi Knight, a hero of the Clone Wars, whose exploits were known across the galaxy. Maul had encountered Skywalker briefly during the war, and had been struck by the sheer raw power radiating from the young Jedi. This was someone who could potentially challenge Sidious, who possessed the strength to disrupt the Sith Lord's carefully laid plans. Through the Force, through visions and meditation, Maul began to understand Sidious's true intention. Anakin Skywalker was being groomed to become Sidious's new apprentice, to replace Count Dooku just as Dooku had replaced Maul. The boy would be turned to the dark side, would become the instrument of the Jedi's destruction, and together, he and Sidious would rule the galaxy. Unless Maul could prevent it. If he could lure Anakin to Mandalore, if he could either kill the Chosen One or turn him against Sidious, then perhaps the Sith Lord's plans could be disrupted. It was a desperate gambit, a slim chance at best, but Maul had built his entire post-Naboo existence on slim chances. But Ahsoka Tano was not bound by the same restrictions. The former Jedi Padawan, who had left the Order after being falsely accused of terrorism, had maintained her connection to the Jedi and the Republic. She agreed to help Bo-Katan, and her former master, Anakin Skywalker, provided her with troops. A division of the 501st Legion led by Commander Rex, clones whose loyalty to Ahsoka was absolute. Maul sensed their approach. Through the Force, he could feel Ahsoka's presence growing closer. But she was not who he wanted. Where was Skywalker? Why had the Chosen One not come himself? The answer frustrated Maul. Anakin had been called back to Coruscant on urgent business. Something about the Chancellor being in danger. Maul didn't know the specific details, but he understood this was Sidious making his move, drawing Anakin into the final stages of his seduction. The siege of Mandalore began with clone troopers landing in Sundari streets. Bo-Katan's warriors fought alongside them, and together they pushed back the super commandos defending the city. The battle was fierce, with both sides employing tactics that turned the capital into a war zone. Civilians fled into shelters while explosions rocked the city above. Maul ordered the Shadow Collective's other leaders to go into hiding. He told them that the Galactic Empire was about to rise, that Darth Sidious would soon control everything, and that they needed to disappear if they wanted to survive. This advice undoubtedly saved many of them, though Maul's motivations were not purely altruistic. He wanted pieces of his organization to survive, so that they might be useful in the future. Then he waited for Ahsoka to find him. When she finally arrived in the throne room, Maul greeted her with dark amusement. "I was hoping for Kenobi," he said. "Why are you here?" Their confrontation was not immediately violent. Maul had something to offer, information that might change everything. He told Ahsoka about his visions, about Sidious's plan, about Anakin Skywalker's role in the coming darkness. He offered her an alliance. Together, they could stop Sidious, could prevent the catastrophe he foresaw. All she had to do was join him. Ahsoka refused. How could she trust Maul, a known murderer and criminal? His words might be lies, another manipulation. She could not abandon everything she believed in based on the word of someone who served the dark side. So they fought. The duel ranged through Mandalore's Undercity, a network of maintenance tunnels and support structures beneath the capital. Maul's skill was undeniable, his technique honed by decades of combat experience. He mocked Ahsoka as they fought, calling her a pawn, pointing out that her former master had already fallen to the dark side, even if she refused to see it. But Ahsoka was not the same frightened Padawan who had left the Jedi Order. She had grown stronger, more confident, more willing to trust her own judgment rather than blindly following rules. She held her own against Maul, her dual lightsabers creating a defensive pattern that absorbed his attacks while looking for openings to counterattack. The turning point came when Ahsoka led Maul into a trap. She had been coordinating with Commander Rex throughout the fight, positioning Maul exactly where she needed him. When they emerged into a plaza in the Undercity, Maul found himself surrounded by clone troopers, all with their weapons trained on him. Before he could react, energy beams from multiple directions struck him simultaneously, not killing, but stunning, overwhelming even his force defenses. When Maul regained consciousness, he found himself imprisoned in a Mandalorian vault, a specialized cell designed to contain Force-sensitive prisoners. The walls generated a field that dampened Force abilities, leaving him weakened, unable to escape through supernatural means. Ahsoka came to see him once more, and Maul made a final attempt to warn her. The galaxy was about to burn, he said. Sidious would kill everyone, would consume everything, and Skywalker, the Chosen One, would be his instrument of destruction. Then Order 66 was activated. Across the entire galaxy, in a single coordinated moment, the clone troopers turned on the Jedi they had been fighting beside for 3 years. The order came directly from Chancellor Palpatine, now revealed as Darth Sidious, newly declared Emperor of the Galactic Empire. The clones, conditioned since their creation with behavioral modification chips, had no choice but to obey. On the Republic cruiser, Rex and the other clones received the order. Rex, having removed his chip with Ahsoka's help just hours earlier, was immune to the command. But all the other clones on the ship immediately turned on Ahsoka, attempting to execute her as Order 66 demanded. Chaos erupted throughout the vessel. Ahsoka fled through the corridors, desperately trying to reach Rex, trying to understand what had happened. The clones hunted her relentlessly, and she was forced to defend herself without killing the soldiers she had fought alongside for so long. In his cell, Maul felt the disturbance in the Force. A great scream echoed through the galaxy as thousands of Jedi died simultaneously. He understood immediately what had happened. Sidious had sprung his trap. The Jedi Order was being annihilated. Everything Maul had warned about was coming to pass. Ahsoka, realizing she needed a distraction to escape the ship, made a decision that would haunt her. She released Maul from his cell. The instant the Mandalorian vault deactivated, Maul burst free. He didn't attack Ahsoka, didn't attempt to kill her or Rex. Instead, he focused all his fury on the clone troopers hunting them. With savage efficiency, he tore through them, using his bare hands and the Force to kill dozens in minutes. The ship was plunging toward a moon, its systems failing, alarms screaming throughout every corridor. Ahsoka and Rex worked frantically to find a way to escape. Maul had his own plan. He made his way to the hyperdrive, and using the Force, he ripped it free from its moorings. The action guaranteed the ship would crash, killing everyone aboard who didn't escape in time. But it also created enough chaos for Maul to reach the hangar bay. There, he found the ship that Ahsoka and Rex had planned to use for their escape. Without hesitation, Maul stole it, leaving them to find another way off the dying cruiser. As he launched into space, he glanced back only once. The Republic cruiser plunged toward the moon's surface, trailing fire and debris. Ahsoka and Rex would survive, he knew. The Force told him they would find a way, but thousands of clones would die in the crash, victims of the galactic transformation that was already underway. Maul set course for Dathomir, his homeworld, The place where his mother had restored him seemed the only refuge left in a galaxy that had just been turned inside out. He had no organization left, no followers, no resources. The Shadow Collective had scattered or been destroyed. His Mandalorian warriors were likely dead or captured. He had nothing except his life and his hatred. But as he traveled through hyperspace, watching the stars streak past, Maul allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He had survived. Against impossible odds, against Sidious himself, he had endured. The Jedi were falling. The Republic was transforming into an empire. Sidious was ascending to absolute power. And somewhere out there, Obi-Wan Kenobi still lived. That fact alone made survival worthwhile. Maul's revenge was not complete. It had barely begun. Now, in this new galaxy, in this empire where the dark side reigned supreme, Maul would rebuild. He would find a way to strike back at everyone who had wronged him. The war was over, but Maul's personal war would never end. Part 7. Crimson Dawn. Maul understood these opportunities better than most. He had lost his position as the visible leader of the Shadow Collective, but he still had connections, still had knowledge of how the underworld operated. More importantly, he understood that the new empire represented both a threat and a potential cover for his activities. If he could rebuild his criminal empire while remaining invisible to the empire's authorities, he could operate with impunity, while Sidious focused on larger concerns. So began Maul's transformation from warlord to shadow leader, from visible conqueror to the hidden hand guiding criminal enterprises from behind a veil of intermediaries. He established a new organization, or rather, he transformed what remained of the Shadow Collective into something more refined, more insidious. Crimson Dawn. The name itself was meaningful. Crimson for the blood-red markings that defined him, for the violence that had always been his tool. Dawn for the new era he was creating, for the beginning of something that would outlast the Empire itself. Crimson Dawn would be different from the Shadow Collective. Where his previous organization had been built on intimidation and open force, Crimson Dawn would operate through subtlety and carefully maintain fronts of legitimacy. To achieve this, Maul needed a public face for his organization, someone who could move through high society, who could interface with legitimate businesses while secretly serving as his lieutenant. He found this person in Dryden Voss, a Hyliban enforcer with the charm, intelligence, and absolutely no moral qualms about murdering anyone who threatened his position. Voss became the public leader of Crimson Dawn, traveling the galaxy aboard his yacht, hosting parties for the wealthy and powerful, conducting business deals that appeared completely legitimate while secretly funneling profits to Maul. To the outside observer, Voss was a successful businessman with questionable connections. In reality, he was Maul's puppet, following orders delivered through encrypted communications and rare personal meetings. Maul himself remained on Dathomir, operating from the ruins of the Nightsister fortress. His mother was gone, his brothers were gone, and the Nightsisters had been nearly exterminated during the Clone Wars. The planet was a tomb, haunted by the ghost of those who had once made it a center of dark side power. It was the perfect place for Maul to hide. From Dathomir, Maul rebuilt his network carefully and methodically. He reached out to the Pike Syndicate, reminding them of the profits they had made under the Shadow Collective. He contacted Black Sun, using both threats and promises to bring them back into the fold. He even managed to maintain some influence with the Hutt clan, though the Hutts remained independently powerful and answered to no one completely. Under Maul's guidance, Crimson Dawn became one of the 5 major crime syndicates operating during the Imperial era. They dealt in smuggling, extortion, slavery, and any other criminal enterprise that generated profit. But they were careful, more careful than most criminal organizations. They bribed the right Imperial officials, stayed out of the way of Imperial priorities, and never drew attention that might cause the Empire to investigate them too closely. Maul also ensured that Crimson Dawn recruited the best operatives available. He wanted people who were skilled, ruthless, and absolutely loyal. Among these operatives was a young woman named Kira, who had been sold into the criminal underworld after failing to escape the shipbuilding world of Corellia with her lover, Han Solo. Kira caught Dryden Voss's attention through her intelligence and her willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. Voss took her under his wing, training her in Terras Casey, the martial art that Maul himself had mastered. She rose quickly through Crimson Dawn's ranks, becoming Voss's most trusted lieutenant, though she never suspected that Voss answered to anyone above himself. For several years, this arrangement worked perfectly. Crimson Dawn generated enormous profits. Maul remained hidden, untouched by the Empire's attention, and the underworld knew, at least in whispers, that someone powerful was coordinating the syndicates, someone who understood how to operate in the shadows. The opportunity to use these tools came sooner than expected. In 10 BBY, approximately a decade after the end of the Clone Wars, a situation arose that threatened to expose Crimson Dawn's operations. A smuggling job had gone wrong, involving a young smuggler named Han Solo, the same boy who had once loved Kira. The coaxium fuel that was being transported had been stolen by a pirate named Enfys Nest, and Dryden Voss was displeased by this failure. Voss summoned Solo, his Wookiee partner Chewbacca, and several others to his yacht to explain themselves. Kira was present as well, having been reunited with Solo after their years of separation. The situation was tense. Voss was furious about the lost coaxium, and the smugglers needed to find a way to replace it or face his wrath. What followed was a complex series of betrayals and counter-betrayals. Solo and his crew stole refined coaxium from the mines of Kessel, one of the most dangerous heists imaginable. But then they faced another problem. Voss intended to sell this fuel to the Empire, using the transaction to gain favor with Imperial authorities. Solo didn't want the fuel used that way and began plotting to betray Voss. Kira found herself torn between her past love for Solo and her position within Crimson Dawn. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to reach her current status. But she also still had feelings for the boy she had once dreamed of escaping with. When the final confrontation came, when Voss and Solo faced off with blasters drawn, Kira made her choice. She killed Dryden Voss. In that moment of decision, she chose her own ambitions over both Solo's desires and Voss's authority. She told Solo to take the coaxium and leave, to disappear with his Wookiee friend and his newfound crew. Solo tried to convince her to come with him, to finally make that escape they had always dreamed of. But Kira knew it was too late for that. She had become something else now, something he could never understand. After Solo left, Kira activated a hologram communicator. She had to report Voss's death to his superior, to explain what had happened and accept the consequences. But when the hologram appeared, Solo would have been shocked by what he saw. Maul, his face unmistakable, his presence radiating dark power even through the hologram. "There's been a complication," Kira said, kneeling before the holographic image. She explained that Tobias Beckett, Solo's mentor, had betrayed them all and killed Voss in the process. This was a lie, of course, covering her own actions, but Maul seemed to accept it. "Come to Dathomir," Maul commanded, igniting his lightsaber to emphasize his authority. "We will be working much more closely from now on." The hologram deactivated, and Kira was left alone with her thoughts. She had just committed herself to serving directly under one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. But she had also ensured her own survival and claimed a position of unprecedented power within Crimson Dawn. The question was, what would Maul teach her? What would he demand of her? And could she survive long enough to perhaps one day surpass him? For Maul, Kira represented a useful tool. She had proven herself cunning, capable of making difficult decisions, and willing to commit murder to achieve her goals. He would train her, would teach her some of what he knew, would make her into an effective leader for Crimson Dawn's day-to-day operations, but he would never trust her completely, would never share his deeper plans. This arrangement would continue for several years, with Kira managing Crimson Dawn's operations under Maul's direction. She proved herself time and again, expanding the organization's reach, eliminating rivals, and generating ever-increasing profits. Under her leadership, Crimson Dawn became even more powerful than it had been under Voss. But all of this was happening while Maul's attention was increasingly pulled elsewhere. Events were unfolding that would eventually draw him away from his criminal empire, away from Dathomir, away from everything he had built during the Imperial era. These events would begin on an ancient Sith world, with a confrontation that would remind Maul that his story was far from over, and that the universe still had painful lessons to teach him. Years passed. The Empire tightened its grip on the galaxy, while resistance movements began forming in response to Imperial tyranny. Maul continued operating from Dathomir, guiding Crimson Dawn's expansion, accumulating power and resources. But he also felt something stirring in the Force, a call from the past that grew stronger with each passing year. Malachor, the ancient Sith world where Darth Sidious had taken him as a youth, where he had breathed the ashes of dead Sith and experienced visions of terrible power. Something was pulling him back there, a compulsion he couldn't quite explain but couldn't resist. Perhaps it was simply nostalgia for the time when he had been a weapon in training, before his defeat had shattered that certainty. Perhaps it was a search for something that had been lost on Naboo. Or perhaps Malachor held secrets that could give him an advantage against the Emperor. Whatever the reason, Maul traveled to Malachor alone. He explored the ruins, walked through the Sith temple that still stood among the petrified warriors, and felt the dark side permeating everything. This place had witnessed one of the greatest conflicts between Jedi and Sith in history, and the echoes of that battle still resonated through the Force. He discovered the temple's secret. It was not merely a monument, but a battle station, a superweapon designed to destroy life on a massive scale. The weapon had misfired during its activation, turning everyone on the planet into stone, but the core systems remained functional. With the right knowledge, the right key, it could be activated again. That key was a Sith holocron, a repository of knowledge that also served as the mechanism for activating the temple's weapon. Maul searched for it obsessively, convinced it held answers he needed. But the temple was vast, its secrets hidden in chambers and passages designed to kill intruders. He made progress slowly, mapping the temple's layout, studying its mechanisms. Then his ship was damaged. A rock slide, a structural collapse, something catastrophic that left his vessel inoperable. Maul found himself stranded on Malachor with no way to leave, no way to contact anyone, no way to return to his empire. For someone who had survived Naboo, survived Lotho Minor, survived Sidious himself, this should have been merely an inconvenience. But months turned into years. Maul remained trapped on Malachor, a hermit in the ruins, surviving on what little the dead world offered. He had plenty of time to think, to meditate, to contemplate every decision that had led him to this point. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent over a decade in madness on Lotho Minor, and now he was spending years in isolation on Malachor. The universe seemed determined to teach him that no matter how much power he accumulated, he could always be reduced to nothing again. During this isolation, Maul constructed a new weapon. His double-bladed lightsaber had been lost during his various adventures, and he needed something more subtle anyway, something that wouldn't immediately identify him as a Force user. He created a single-bladed lightsaber disguised as a walking cane, an Inquisitor-style lightsaber with a cylindrical hilt that concealed its true nature. It was elegant in its simplicity, functional in its deception. The years on Malachor changed Maul. Without the constant activity of running Crimson Dawn, without opponents to fight or plans to execute, he turned inward. His hatred remained, of course. His desire for revenge against Kenobi and Sidious never dimmed. But he also developed a kind of bitter wisdom, an understanding that power alone was not enough. He needed knowledge, he needed allies, he needed timing. And then, finally, something broke the monotony of his existence. Visitors arrived on Malachor. Maul sensed them through the Force. A young Force-sensitive boy, a Jedi, and a former Jedi. They were searching for something, knowledge to help them fight the Inquisitors hunting them. They had come to the same place he had, seeking power from the Sith's legacy. Among these visitors was a Padawan named Ezra Bridger. The boy was untrained by conventional Jedi standards, full of raw potential but lacking discipline. He reminded Maul of himself at that age, hungry for knowledge, willing to do whatever was necessary to protect those he cared about. This made Ezra exploitable, vulnerable to manipulation. "You may call me Old Master," Maul said with false humility. "And what should I call you?" "Jabba," Ezra replied, using a false name, showing he wasn't completely trusting. They worked together, navigating the temple's dangers. Maul explained that he sought the Sith holocron, claiming it held knowledge about how to destroy the Sith. This was partially true. The holocron did hold knowledge, though not in the way Maul presented. Together, they retrieved it from its resting place in an altar deep within the temple. But then they were reunited with Ezra's companions, Kanan Jarrus, a blind Jedi Knight who had survived Order 66, and Ahsoka Tano, the former Jedi Padawan who had left the Order before its destruction. Maul immediately recognized Ahsoka, though she had been much younger when they last encountered each other during the siege of Mandalore. The presence of two experienced Force users complicated his plans significantly. Maul shifted strategies quickly. He proposed they all work together to unlock the temple's secrets, to use its power against the Inquisitors still hunting them. The group reluctantly agreed, recognizing that the Inquisitors represented an immediate threat that needed to be dealt with first. They fought their way deeper into the temple, eventually reaching its apex, where the holocron could be used as a key. Maul instructed Ezra to place the holocron in an obelisk at the temple's peak. When he did, the ancient weapon began to activate. Energy coursed through the temple's structure, and a presence spoke to Ezra, a feminine voice that represented the Sith who had originally commanded this battle station. She told Ezra that the power to destroy life itself was now at his command. Ezra immediately realized he had been deceived. This wasn't knowledge about destroying the Sith. It was a weapon that would kill indiscriminately. Before he could remove the holocron, Maul revealed his true intentions. He attacked Kanan, striking with vicious efficiency, his lightsaber cutting across Kanan's eyes and blinding the Jedi permanently. Then he fled, intending to let the temple destroy everyone else while he escaped with the knowledge he had gained. But fate had one more encounter in store. Darth Vader, the Emperor's most feared enforcer, arrived on Malachor. The Dark Lord had sensed the temple's activation and came to claim its power for the Empire. When Vader confronted Ezra, Ahsoka intervened, and a duel of tremendous significance began. The former Padawan fighting her former master, now twisted into a monster by the dark side. In the chaos, Kanan and Ezra managed to remove the holocron, causing the temple to begin imploding. The weapon's power, denied its intended activation, turned inward, tearing the structure apart. Ezra and Kanan escaped on their ship, but Ahsoka remained behind and apparently killed in her confrontation with Vader. Maul escaped as well, stealing an Inquisitor ship that had been docked outside the temple. As he lifted away from the disintegrating structure, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had the holocron. He had escaped. He had survived Malachor yet again. But he had also failed. The weapon had not been activated. The knowledge he sought was incomplete. And most frustratingly, he recognized that Ezra Bridger represented something important. The boy had potential, real potential, to be shaped into a powerful dark side user. In another life, Maul might have taken him as an apprentice, in truth, rather than as a tool to be manipulated. This thought would haunt Maul in the days to come. He had lost 2 brothers, a mother, and countless followers over the years. He had operated alone for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to have someone fighting beside him who wasn't motivated purely by fear or profit. Ezra could have been that person, could have been the ally Maul needed to finally strike at Sidious. But the moment had passed. Ezra would return to his Jedi companions, would continue fighting the Empire as part of the growing rebellion, and Maul would continue his solitary existence, forever seeking the power and knowledge to achieve his revenge. And most of all, he needed to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. The desire for that particular revenge had never faded, had only grown stronger during his years of isolation. Kenobi was out there somewhere, hiding, waiting. And Maul would find him. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. Part 9. The Manipulation of Ezra Bridger. Maul's encounter with Ezra Bridger on Malachor had awoken something in the former Sith. For years, he had operated alone, trusting no one, relying only on his own abilities. But Ezra represented possibility. The boy was powerful, impressionable, and standing at a crossroads between light and dark. With the right influence, he could be turned, could become the ally Maul desperately needed. More than that, Maul sensed that Ezra might know something important, something connected to the question that had obsessed Maul since his resurrection. Where was Obi-Wan Kenobi? The Jedi had vanished after Order 66, gone into hiding so completely that even the Empire's vast intelligence network had failed to locate him. But someone knew where he was. Someone had to. And if Ezra had any connection to that knowledge, Maul would extract it. But approaching Ezra directly was impossible. The boy had returned to his rebel cell, the crew of a ship called the Ghost, and they were constantly on the move, fighting against the Empire. Maul needed to draw Ezra out, needed to create a situation where the boy would seek him out voluntarily. For that, he needed leverage. The Sith holocron he had recovered from Malachor was one piece of the puzzle. Ezra had taken a Jedi holocron from the temple as well. Maul knew from ancient Sith teachings that combining two holocrons, one Jedi and one Sith, could create a powerful ritual. The holocrons would merge their knowledge, would answer questions that neither could answer alone, would reveal secrets hidden from individual users. Maul decided to use this ritual as bait. He tracked the Ghost to a remote rebel base, using the dark side to sense Ezra's presence across vast distances. Then he infiltrated the base through a combination of stealth and violence, using repurposed tour guide droids as his muscle. He took Ezra's crewmates hostage: Hera Syndulla, Garazeb Aurelios, and Sabine Wren, along with their astromech droid Chopper. When Ezra and Kanan returned to find their ship occupied, Maul made his demands clear through holographic communication. He wanted the Sith holocron that Kanan had taken from Ezra and hidden. In exchange, he would release the hostages. It seemed like a simple trade, but Maul's true goal was more complex. The holocrons were hidden separately. Kanan had secured the Sith holocron in a cave guarded by Krykna, dangerous spider-like creatures native to the rebel base's planet. The Jedi holocron remained with Ezra. Maul needed both, but more importantly, He needed Ezra to voluntarily participate in combining them. Reluctantly, Ezra and Kanan agreed to the trade. They retrieved the Sith holocron and met Maul at Vizsla Keep 09, an old Shadow Collective facility that Maul had maintained. Once there, Maul proposed something different. Instead of simply returning the holocron, they would combine it with the Jedi holocron and ask a question. Each of them sought knowledge. Maul wanted to know the location of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ezra wanted to know how to destroy the Sith. In a moment that would have far-reaching consequences, Ezra agreed. They sat facing each other, each holding one holocron. As they opened the ancient devices simultaneously, energy crackled between them. The holocrons lifted into the air, spinning faster and faster, merging their essences. Images flashed through both their minds, planets, systems, symbols. Ezra saw visions that confused him, locations he didn't recognize, faces he didn't know. A desert planet with twin suns. None of it made clear sense, though some part of his subconscious registered the images for future reference. Maul attempted to manipulate this bond immediately. He whispered to Ezra through the Force, feeding him false visions, trying to convince the boy that they were destined to work together. He wanted Ezra to come to him willingly, to accept training, to embrace the dark side's power. But Ezra resisted, recognizing the manipulation for what it was. Frustrated but patient, Maul began a more elaborate scheme. He traveled to Dathomir, to the ruins of the Nightsister fortress where his mother had restored him years ago. There, he found that some of Mother Talzin's magic lingered, preserved in crystals and artifacts. The spirits of dead Nightsisters could be invoked under the right circumstances, though doing so was dangerous even for someone with Maul's knowledge. Using the Force bond, Maul lured Ezra to Dathomir. He convinced the boy that only by confronting him there could Ezra break their connection and free himself from the visions. It was partially true. The bond could be severed through a specific ritual involving Nightsister magic. But Maul had no intention of actually freeing Ezra. He wanted to trap him there, to use the boy's friends as leverage, to force him to accept apprenticeship. When Ezra arrived with Kanan and Sabine, they found themselves in a fortress filled with dark magic and ancient dangers. Maul waited in the inner sanctum, where Mother Talzin's altar still stood. He proposed a deal. He would help them sever the Force bond. But first, they needed to perform a ritual that would reveal the true meaning of the visions they had shared. The ritual involved using Nightsister magic to peer into their minds, to extract the knowledge buried in their subconscious. Maul spoke the incantations, channeling the green mist of Nightsister power. But the magic had a price. It awakened the spirits of the dead Nightsisters, and these spirits were hungry for revenge against anyone still living. Chaos erupted as the spirits possessed Kanan and Sabine, turning them against Ezra. Maul, protected by his knowledge of the ritual, fought alongside Ezra to reach the altar where the ritual could be completed. When they finally touched the altar together, the truth was revealed to both of them. Maul's vision clarified completely. He saw Tatooine. He saw Obi-Wan living in isolation, and he understood now that Kenobi was protecting someone important, someone who represented hope for the galaxy's future. The identity wasn't clear, but the connection to the twin suns was undeniable. Ezra's vision also clarified, showing him that Obi-Wan Kenobi was alive and on Tatooine, though he didn't fully understand why this mattered to the question of destroying the Sith. With the ritual complete and the spirits no longer bound, Maul made one final offer. He asked Ezra to leave his friends behind and embrace his destiny as Maul's apprentice. Together, they could find Kenobi, could use him to strike at the Emperor, could reshape the galaxy. Ezra only needed to let go of his attachments, his sentiment, his weakness. Ezra refused. Despite everything, despite the temptation of power and the appeal of having answers to his questions, he chose his friends. He chose the light. Disappointed, Maul told Ezra he had failed him and departed, leaving the boy to deal with the Nightsister spirits that still haunted the fortress. But Maul had what he needed. He knew where Obi-Wan Kenobi was hiding. After decades of searching, after fantasizing about revenge for years during his madness on Lotho Minor, he finally had a location. The question now was how to draw Kenobi out. The Jedi was clearly in hiding for a reason, protecting something too important to risk by engaging with his old enemy. The answer was obvious. Use Ezra. The boy had rejected apprenticeship, but he had also shown himself to be heroic, willing to risk himself to save others. If Maul could lure Ezra to Tatooine, Kenobi would sense the danger to an innocent Force sensitive. The Jedi would be forced to intervene, and when he did, Maul would be waiting. Maul followed at a distance, patient now that the endgame was in sight. He had waited decades for this moment. He could wait a few more hours. When Ezra's ship entered Tatooine's atmosphere, Maul was already there, having arrived earlier to scout the terrain and prepare. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, the twin suns blazing overhead, the heat oppressive even for someone who had survived much worse. Maul searched through the Force, trying to pinpoint Kenobi's location, but the Jedi was concealing his presence well. He would have to wait for Kenobi to reveal himself. In the meantime, Maul encountered a tribe of Tusken raiders. These desert dwellers attacked anyone who ventured into their territory, and they saw Maul as just another intruder. The fight was brief. Maul's lightsaber cut through them efficiently, his dark side power overwhelming their primitive weapons. But he left one survivor deliberately, knowing that tales of a demon in the desert would spread and potentially draw Kenobi's attention even faster. He also encountered Ezra's ship, destroyed by the same Tusken raiders before Maul had arrived. The boy and his droid were somewhere in the desert, vulnerable, exposed. Perfect bait. Maul could have killed them, but that would defeat his purpose. He needed Ezra alive to draw out Kenobi. As night fell over the desert, Maul found a canyon where he could watch for any sign of his quarry. He meditated, centering himself, preparing for the confrontation that would finally settle the score from Naboo. Memories flooded through him, training under Sidious, the first duel with Qui-Gon, the triumph of killing a Jedi Master, the shock of defeat, the decade of madness that followed. All of it led to this moment. All the pain, all the suffering, all the hatred condensed into a single purpose. Obi-Wan Kenobi had destroyed his life. Now, in this desert, where they had first clashed years ago, Maul would destroy Kenobi's. He just needed to wait for dawn. Part 10, Twin Suns. The twin suns rose over Tatooine's endless desert, bringing with them heat that would kill an unprepared traveler in hours. Maul had spent the night in meditation, his mechanical legs anchoring him to the rock he perched upon, his mind reaching out through the Force to sense any disturbance that might indicate Obi-Wan Kenobi's presence. Below him, in the canyon, he heard movement. Ezra and his droid were making their way through the ravine, following what the boy believed to be a beacon toward Kenobi's location. They were using a fragment of the Sith holocron as a compass, not realizing it was leading them in circles, keeping them in an area where Maul could monitor them. Then Maul felt something change, a presence in the Force, subtle but unmistakable. Someone powerful was approaching, someone who had been hiding their strength but could no longer remain concealed when an innocent life was threatened. A smile crossed Maul's face. Finally, he descended into the canyon, positioning himself where he knew Ezra would pass. When the boy and droid came around a bend, exhausted from a night of wandering, Maul was waiting. He made no threatening moves, simply stood there, allowing Ezra to see him. "Going somewhere?" Maul asked pleasantly. Ezra's hand went to his lightsaber, but Maul raised his hands peacefully. "Relax. I'm not here for you. Not anymore. You served your purpose admirably." He gestured toward the horizon. "You should leave now while you still can." "What's about to happen?" "Well, let's just say you don't want to be caught in the middle." "Where is he?" Ezra demanded. "Where's Kenobi?" Kenobi descended into the canyon, dismounting from his dewback mount. He addressed Ezra first, his voice calm and authoritative. "I'll take it from here. You need to leave now." "But," Ezra started. "No arguments," Obi-Wan said firmly. "You were manipulated into coming here. Don't make it worse by staying. Go." Ezra wanted to protest further, but something in Kenobi's tone, some echo of the authority he had once wielded as a Jedi general, compelled obedience. The boy gathered his droid and retreated, leaving the two old enemies alone in the canyon. For a long moment neither spoke. They simply looked at each other. Seeing the changes that decades had wrought, Maul saw the man Obi-Wan had become, older, weathered by the desert, but still strong, still dangerous. His beard was fuller, his face lined with experience, but his eyes that held the same determination that had defeated Maul on Naboo. Obi-Wan saw what had become of Maul, a being sustained by hatred, with mechanical legs replacing what had been cut away, his face bearing the scars of unimaginable suffering. Yet, despite everything, despite the madness and the pain, there was something almost pitiable about him. This was someone who had been broken by the dark side, who had been used and discarded by those he served, and who had nothing left except his obsession with revenge. "Look at what has become of you," Obi-Wan said softly. "A rat in the desert." "Look at what I've risen above," Maul countered. "I have survived Kenobi. I have endured. While you hide in this wasteland, I have carved my name across the galaxy." "And what has that gotten you?" Obi-Wan asked. "You're here, alone, chasing a vendetta that should have ended decades ago. The boy who cut you in half is long gone. I am not that person anymore." "Then you will share his fate," Maul said, dropping into a combat stance. Obi-Wan sighed and ignited his lightsaber. The blue blade sprang to life, and for just a moment he shifted his stance. He began in the defensive form he had perfected, Soresu, the ultimate expression of patience and protection. But then he shifted, his feet moving into the stance his former master, Qui-Gon Jinn, had used all those years ago on Naboo. Maul recognized the change immediately. He understood what Kenobi was doing, offering himself as bait, using Qui-Gon's stance to trigger Maul's memory of that duel, to make him repeat the same technique that had killed the Jedi Master. Maul knew it was a trap, understood that Kenobi was ready for the specific attack, but his hatred, his muscle memory, his overwhelming desire to prove he could have won that duel if he had faced Qui-Gon again, all of it compelled him forward. Maul charged. His lightsabers came up in the same pattern he had used against Qui-Gon, the same sequence of strikes designed to overwhelm the opponent's defenses. At the last moment, he would repeat his signature move, a thrust with the lightsaber's hilt, stunning the opponent and leaving them vulnerable to a killing blow. But Obi-Wan was ready. He had spent decades thinking about that duel, understanding how Maul had killed Qui-Gon, preparing himself for the possibility that he might one day face Maul again. When the hilt strike came, Obi-Wan's lightsaber was already moving, angling perfectly to deflect the hilt, while simultaneously cutting down through Maul's weapon. The clash lasted 3 strikes. Maul's lightsaber was cut in half. Then Obi-Wan's blade continued its arc, cutting through Maul's torso with precise efficiency. The former Sith Lord gasped, feeling his strength drain away instantly. He began to fall, and Obi-Wan caught him, lowering him gently to the sand. Maul looked up at his killer, and in that moment, something shifted in his expression. The hatred faded, replaced by something more complex. Acceptance, perhaps, or even relief. He was dying, truly dying this time, and part of him had been waiting for this for longer than he could remember. "He is," Obi-Wan replied gently. Maul's eyes showed understanding. If the Chosen One still lived, if Anakin Skywalker's son was being hidden here, then perhaps there was still hope for the galaxy. Perhaps Sidious would fall after all. Perhaps everything Maul had fought for in his own twisted way would still come to pass. "He will avenge us," Maul said, his last words carrying both prophecy and peace. Then Darth Maul, the Dathomirian Zabrak who had survived his bisection through sheer hatred, who had clawed his way back from madness twice, who had built criminal empires and fought against the most powerful beings in the galaxy, finally died. Obi-Wan closed Maul's eyes with his hand and sat beside him for several moments, mourning not for what Maul had been, but for what he might have been if circumstances had been different. Later, Obi-Wan built a funeral pyre and burned Maul's body according to Jedi tradition, showing respect for an enemy who deserved at least that much dignity in death. He stood watching the flames until nothing remained but ashes that the desert wind would scatter. In the distance, from the Lars homestead, came the sound of a woman calling, "Luke! Luke, come inside." Obi-Wan mounted his dewback and rode toward the farm, close enough to see Luke Skywalker, a boy barely in his teens, running home across the sand. The Chosen One's son, the hope of the galaxy, was safe, and Darth Maul, The last significant threat to that safety besides the Empire itself was gone. Ezra and Chopper, having reached Maul's ship, flew it back to their rebel base. When they arrived, Ezra told his friends that they wouldn't be seeing Maul again. There was certainty in his voice, a sense through the Force that the connection between them had finally been severed, not through ritual, but through death. The Ghost crew accepted this news with mixed feelings. Maul had been a dangerous enemy, but he had also been a tragic figure, someone who could have been an ally if the galaxy had unfolded differently. But such speculation was pointless. The past was fixed, and the future was what they fought for. On Dathomir, in the ruins of the Nightsister fortress, the wind howled through empty chambers where Maul had once lived. His criminal empire, Crimson Dawn, would continue under Chira's leadership. She had learned from him, had absorbed his teachings about manipulation and power, and would use those lessons to build something even greater. In time she would attempt what Maul had never managed, a direct strike against Emperor Palpatine himself. But that was a story for another time. For now, the story of Darth Maul had reached its conclusion on the same planet where it had nearly ended 30 years earlier. Tatooine, the desert world that had witnessed his first clash with the Jedi, had also witnessed his last. The circle was complete. Log, Legacy. Darth Maul's death on Tatooine in 2BBY meant he did not live to see the fulfillment of his final prophecy. He did not witness Luke Skywalker's role in destroying the Death Star, did not see Darth Vader's redemption, did not witness Emperor Palpatine's fall at the Battle of Endor. The Chosen One's son did indeed avenge them, did bring down the empire that had oppressed the galaxy, did restore the Jedi in a new form. But Maul's influence extended beyond his death. The criminal networks he established, the techniques he pioneered, the philosophy he embodied, all of these continued to shape the galaxy for years to come. Crimson Dawn, under Kira's leadership, became one of the most powerful organizations during the Galactic Civil War. She used her resources to undermine the Empire, though her ultimate plan to kill Palpatine failed. Still, the chaos she sowed contributed to the conditions that allowed the Rebel Alliance to succeed. In his final moments, cradled by the Jedi who had defeated him, Maul found something he had been searching for unconsciously throughout his entire second life: peace. The knowledge that Sidious would eventually that the Chosen One's prophecy would be fulfilled allowed him to let go of the hatred that had sustained him for so long. His last words, "He will avenge us," revealed a truth Maul had perhaps not fully understood till that moment. Despite everything, despite serving the dark side and opposing the Jedi, Maul and Obi-Wan had both been victims of Sidious's machinations. The Emperor had shaped both their destinies, had used them as pieces in his grand game, and had discarded them when they were no longer useful. In acknowledging this shared victimhood, Maul transcended his hatred and recognized a larger truth. The real enemy had always been Sidious, and defeating him was more important than any personal vendetta. Maul's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dark side's promises and prices. He was offered power and gave everything for it. He was trained to be a weapon and discovered too late that weapons are not valued for their own sake, but only for their use. He survived his own death and found that survival without purpose is just another form of torment. But his story is also one of resilience, of refusing to be defined by defeat, of clawing back from depths that would have destroyed anyone else. In a galaxy full of beings who claimed to be powerful, Maul's power was perhaps the most hard-won. He earned every ounce of it through suffering that would have broken lesser beings. The Sith philosophy taught that the strong survive and the weak perish. By that measure, Darth Maul was one of the strongest beings ever to walk the dark path. He survived everything the galaxy threw at him and died on his own terms, having finally found what he had been searching for. Not revenge, not power, but simply an end to the struggle and the peace that comes with accepting one's place in a larger story. His body burned on Tatooine, his ashes scattered by the desert wind. But his legend endured. In the criminal underworld, stories were told of the Zabrak who had united the syndicates, who had conquered Mandalore, who had stood against the Empire itself. In the archives of the Jedi, if any survived to record such things, Maul would be remembered as one of the first Sith to reveal themselves after 1,000 years of hiding, the herald of the dark times that followed, and perhaps in some quiet meditation chamber where Force ghosts linger, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi looked upon Maul's spirit with something approaching understanding. They had all been shaped by the same war between light and dark. They had all been used by forces larger than themselves. And in the end, they had all contributed in their own ways to the chosen one fulfilling his destiny. Darth Maul's tale is complete. From his birth on Dathomir to his training under Sidious, from his triumph and fall on Naboo to his resurrection and madness, from building criminal empires to his final duel under Tatooine's twin suns, his story is one of the most remarkable in galactic history. He was a weapon forged in darkness, a survivor who refused to die, a fallen lord who found something resembling redemption in his final breath. He was Darth Maul, and the galaxy will not see his like again. If you've made it this far in our journey through Darth Maul's complete history, thank you for taking this deep dive into one of the most complex and fascinating characters in Star Wars lore. His story reminds us that even in a galaxy defined by the struggle between light and dark, there are shades of gray that make every character more human, more relatable, more tragic. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this comprehensive look at Maul's life, and subscribe to Sith Lore for more deep dives into the dark side of Star Wars. The galaxy's shadows hold countless stories, and we're here to illuminate them, one tale at a time. May the dark side serve you well, and may you find the peace that eluded so many who walked its path. Until next time, sleep well and dream of the stars.